Mary Kelly, Miller's Court, Whitechapel, November 9th, 1888. Her face had been flayed clean off. On the floor of that damp, windowless room, Mary's body was no longer a body. Her intestines had been draped across the bedside table like ribbons, her heart missing, her skin peeled back and hung like a butcher's curtain. The stench, a sickening blend of coal smoke, old blood, and something sour like rotting milk in a copper bucket. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling beams, as if trying to escape through the cracks. The door had been locked from the inside. There were no signs of struggle, no screams reported, just silence, then the smell, then the horror. Neighbors swore they heard soft singing hours before the discovery an Irish lullaby, faint, ghostly, and wrong. The fireplace still burned low, casting flickers on a teacup smeared in something too thick to be tea. She was supposed to have left town that morning. She'd packed. She'd told friends she had good news. Someone had plans for her. But what entered that room wasn't a lover, and what happened inside wasn't passion or rage. It was ritual. It was exact, almost surgical. Some said it was Jack. Others whispered it wasn't, that Jack wouldn't have taken the heart. That this wasn't murder, it was a message. To someone watching. To someone powerful. Because Mary wasn't just another prostitute. Not really. She knew things. About the men who walked those streets with gold rings and leather gloves. About the names no one dared say out loud. Names tied to Parliament, to the Crown. What they did to her wasn't just to silence her. It was to warn the rest. This isn't just a story about poverty and violence. It's a sealed vault, cracked open. And what's inside has waited over a century to be seen. She awoke to the sound of dripping steady, relentless. Something wet had wormed its way beneath the cracks in the wooden wall. Mary lay motionless on a straw-stuffed mattress, the coarse blanket wrapped around her like a burial shroud. Her fingers curled against the cold, seeking warmth that didn't exist. The fog had crept in through the window slats during the night. It hung thick in the room now, pressing against her chest like an unwelcome hand. The room stank of mildew, burnt coal, and the faint rot of old vomit. It was the smell of too many bodies passed through too few square feet. She could hear them beyond the walls, coughs, muffled moans, the creak of bed springs under weight, the wheeze of a child dreaming badly. Somewhere below, in the street, a cart rolled over broken cobblestones. Hooves splashed in something more red than rain. Mary rose, slowly, every joint reluctant. Her dress from the night before lay in a crumpled pile at her feet, damp and soiled. She dressed without thinking. The fabric scraped her skin like sandpaper. She hadn't washed in days. There was no basin, no soap, no strength. Her undergarments clung to her body, stiff with cold sweat. Outside, Whitechapel breathed smoke. The air was thick with soot from chimney stacks, with steam from public kitchens, with the invisible miasma of hunger and fatigue. Narrow alleys curved between leaning brick buildings like veins in a corpse. Gas lamps flickered behind smudged glass, casting shadows that moved when no one did. Women stood silently under door frames, wrapped in shawls eaten by moths, eyes scanning the street for coin or threat, sometimes the same thing. They didn't speak unless spoken to. Each breath showed as vapor in the air. Their faces were pale, hollow-cheeked, lips split from cold. Their feet were soaked inside cracked leather boots. Their hands shook, not from fear, but from absence of food, of warmth, of choice. Mary passed them as one of them. She didn't need to ask their names. They'd been lost long ago, replaced by nicknames, by rumors, by the price they could fetch. She met eyes with a girl no older than 16, her belly already rounding with life she could not afford. The girl looked away, ashamed or resigned, probably both. She wandered toward Spitalfields Market, where the air was warmer from the crowd, and where a drunkard's coin might fall from his coat. Around her, cries of vendors. 3 a penny. Hot eel pie clashed with the grunts of hungover men, the metallic clang of carts unloading barrels of beer, the smell of rotting cabbage mixed with pipe smoke and human waste. A rat scurried across her boot. She didn't flinch. She passed a shop window covered in grime. Behind it, A gown of blue silk stood displayed on a headless mannequin. For a moment. Mary stopped, her breath caught. The dress shimmered even in the dull light. She placed her hand against the glass. It was cool. Her reflection stared back at her bloodshot eyes, a bruise blooming along her jawline, a dried line of blood at the corner of her mouth. She looked nothing like the woman who once danced barefoot across a field in Ireland, singing to the wind. A voice barked behind her, "Move along, girl." She turned and left. Later, she found herself inside a public house, warmed by gin she hadn't paid for. A man had bought it for her. He had soft hands, wore a hat too clean for Whitechapel. He didn't speak much. He asked her name, and she lied. He smiled, as if that's what he wanted. They walked through the fog together. She no longer felt her feet. The city pulsed around her, groaning like an old beast. Dogs barked from behind metal gates. A baby cried behind a shuttered window. Somewhere, a piano played a hymn too slow to be comforting. She led him to the room, Miller's Court, 1 shilling a night. The door creaked. The man stepped inside first. She followed, fingers grazing the frame like it might remember her. Inside, the light died quickly. She lit a candle. It sputtered. The man looked at the bed. She looked at the window. Her heart beat not faster but slower, as if trying to disappear. The man said nothing. The door closed. In this corner of London, a body is a ledger, each bruise, each cough, each silence, a line in someone else's tally. Mary's life a record of debts she could not repay. In death. Her name meant nothing. She became part of the fog. But Mary wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. The first body was found just before dawn. August 31st, 1888, Bucks Row, Mary Ann Nichols. Her skirts were thrown up over her knees, exposing a gaping wound across her throat. Her eyes stared upward, as if fixed on a sky she'd never escape. The blood had already congealed dark, sticky, pooled beneath her head like a crown of rot. A constable's lantern trembled in his grip. The light revealed a face puffy with drink and despair. Her teeth, oddly white, clenched in silent resistance. She was 43, but looked older. Her final night had been spent begging for 4 pence to sleep indoors. She didn't find it. Her last words, overheard at a lodging house doorway, were, "I'll get my DOS money somehow." That somehow was still bleeding when they found her. She wasn't buried with a name. She was buried with a warning. A week later, a second body, Annie Chapman. She died with her hands curled into fists. One palm clutched a folded piece of muslin, the other, empty. Her throat was severed so deeply it nearly detached her head, her abdomen open, her intestines, coiled on the ground like something deliberately placed. She had a daughter once, a wedding ring she'd sold for gin. She had tuberculosis, and coughed blood onto her sleeves when she spoke. Her neighbors said she muttered to herself. Others claimed she had a quiet dignity. That night, she'd been turned away from her lodging house. Too little money. She said she'd be back soon with it. She never came back. In the stillness of Hanbury Street, just past sunrise, a woman screamed, not at the sight of the body, but at the smell, a stench of iron and waste, hanging thick like steam. Someone had arranged her, not killed, displayed. September 30th, 2 more. Elizabeth Stride's throat was slit, but her body left intact. No mutilation, no time. Maybe the killer was interrupted. Maybe someone else came too close. Her body was found in Dutfield's yard, near Burner Street. She still held a piece of peppermint candy in one hand. Elizabeth had spoken of a new start, a second chance. She had even worn a flower pinned to her jacket that night, a rare, sad defiance. Her eyes were open, wide, and bloodshot. Her face was still wet from rain or tears. Just 45 minutes later, across town, Catherine Eddowes lay in Mitre Square. She was unrecognizable. Her face had been carved open, cheeks flayed, eyelids sliced, her nose gashed, lips split, her intestines spilled and draped across her shoulder like a grotesque shawl. Her left kidney had been removed. She had been released from jail only hours earlier, drunk, singing. Her final song had no lyrics, just a hum, soft and off-key. She laughed when the constables let her go. She didn't know she was walking into history. Then came the last Mary Jane Kelly. You've already seen what they did to her. But what you haven't heard is the part just before it, when she spoke with her landlady through the wall. She was singing again. A violet from mother's grave. Her voice broke on the final note. It was the only thing left whole in that room. 5 women. All poor, all alone, all failed by the world before the knife ever found them. Their hands were work-worn, their lungs heavy with soot and sickness. They had lived in corners and corridors, under gaslight and judgment. The press called them whores. But look closer. Mary Ann had worked in a print shop. Annie had raised children. Elizabeth once ran a coffee house. Catherine had a brother who looked for her in the papers. Mary Jane had dreams of opening a dress shop. They were not just victims. They were survivors until they weren't. Their lives ended not in back alleys, but in the middle of conversations. In the warmth of small hopes, a borrowed scarf, a clean bed, a better morning. The killer didn't just cut them open. He interrupted them. Forever. And the city it watched. It watched as the blood dried, as names became headlines, as bodies turned into symbols. But no one cleaned the alley stones. No one followed the trail back past the fog, to where survival had become silence. 5 women, and not one of them screamed. At the edge of the West End, where the gaslights burned steadier and the gutters ran clearer, a house stood behind iron railings, silent, immaculate, and deadly. From the outside, it could have been mistaken for a boarding school or a widow's home. Lace curtains framed every window. A brass knocker gleamed on the black-painted door. But inside, velvet swallowed every footstep. The air smelled of powder, wine, and something metallic beneath it too faint to name. Upstairs, girls waited in silence. They sat on plush chaises, legs crossed at the ankle, backs straight, hands folded just so. Their dresses were not their own, neither was the rouge on their cheeks, nor the pearls that pressed cold against their collarbones. A maid lit incense to mask the stink of sweat and semen soaked into the curtains. The music box clicked into life, a soft waltz spinning in circles, mechanical and tired. They called this a refined house. Clients were announced by name: Sir Godfrey, Captain Renly, Lord L. Some were married. Some arrived with gloves still stained from the fox hunt. They chose not by conversation, but by glance, by silence, by a gesture of a ringed finger. To be chosen meant a full meal, a warm bath, a reprieve from beatings, but it also meant debt. Each gown came at a price, each bottle of smelling salts, every pressed napkin and every visit from the doctor. The girls were told they were looked after. What they were was owned. Further east, in Whitechapel, a different kind of house stood. The sign out front had rotted away. Its windows were cracked, its chimney forever leaking soot. Inside, the floorboards sagged, sticky with spilled ale and blood. The walls trembled when a cart passed by. This was where the unchosen went. Here, girls did not sit, they waited, sometimes hunched in doorways, sometimes on their knees. Their dresses were stitched and restitched until the fabric thinned to gauze. Their faces were bare, their hands calloused. They did not speak unless shouted at. They did not eat unless someone brought bread. They rarely slept fully clothed, because sleep meant theft. There were no names here, just the word you. When a man entered, they didn't ask what he wanted, they only asked upstairs, or not. Outside the houses, on the cobbled streets under the fog, were those with no roof at all. They worked under lamplight, leaning against posts, one hand in their pocket clutching something sharp, not for defense, but for proof that the night had a cost. Their clients were drunkards, butchers, dockers, sailors, soldiers. Some were boys, some were priests. All paid. A girl might earn 6pence, enough for a bed, or gin, never both. The cold bit through their shoes. Rats chewed through their satchels. They pissed in alleyways, bled into rags. They learned to scream without sound. Some disappeared, some returned torn, eyes vacant. They wore nothing of silk, but they carried everything. One girl named Elsie used to smile when she walked, not for anyone else, just to herself, like she remembered something no one could steal. She'd once worked in a better house, until a client accused her of theft, No proof, no trial, one evening. The madam handed her a coat too thin and showed her the door. The cold took her voice within weeks. When she spoke now, it rasped like sandpaper. Elsie slept in the back of a pub cellar. She traded favors for shelter. Her fingers shook when she tied her hair. Her knees bore bruises not from clients, but from collapsing while walking. She still braided a ribbon through her hair, filthy now, faded blue. The girls on the corner called her Lady Fog. It was half joke, half prayer. One night, a man followed her into the yard behind the slaughterhouse. She didn't come back. Her ribbon was found hanging on a meat hook. The city divided these women like cuts of meat. Top shelf, mid-tier, street. Some tasted of wine and powder, some of salt and rust, but all of them bled the same, and every man who paid whether in gold or in filth helped grind the wheel that turned beauty into debt, and debt into silence. There was no escape, only transfer. A girl might rise for a season fitted in borrowed lace, praised for her laugh, but she'd fall just as fast. One illness, one jealous client, one night too long without a breath, then back to the gutter, or the river. And still, new girls came. From the countryside, from Scotland, from Wales, from Ireland, from orphanages, from workhouses, lured by promises. Come to London, there's work in a fine home, you'll earn your keep. They arrived with their hair combed, eyes wide, hands shaking with hope. Within a month, their cheeks were hollow, their eyes darted at shadows. Within 6 months, they had stopped writing home. Within a year, no one remembered their real names. They called it the oldest profession. But in Victorian London, it was something else entirely. It was the slow starvation of the soul priced by the hour and paid in silence. And the streets remembered every step. Even when the names were forgotten, she came back limping. No one asked her why, no one had to. Ada pressed her body into the corner of the cellar, knees drawn tight to her chest, fingers shaking from more than cold. Her lips were split, the blood dark and dried. One eye was nearly swollen shut. Her corset was torn open at the back, not cut, but clawed. She didn't speak, just rocked. The other girls didn't look. They'd seen it before. They would see it again, in Whitechapel. The price wasn't just coin, it was skin. It was silence. Outside, a constable passed with his lantern swaying. He didn't knock, he didn't ask. The door stayed shut. Violence in these streets didn't arrive suddenly. It seeped. First came the insults, the muttered slurs from passing men, the hisses from doorways. Then came the pushes, the slaps, sometimes a hand across the face, sometimes across the mouth, then the fists, then the boots, then the knives, and always the quiet afterward. No screaming, no chase, no justice. Only the sound of breath being gathered again. Annie Millwood survived her first attack. They found her behind a butcher's stall, her arms covered in stab wounds, short, shallow, methodical. The doctor called them hesitation marks, as if someone had practiced on her, as if her body was not a victim, but rehearsal. She didn't remember who did it, or wouldn't say. She was discharged from the infirmary 2 weeks later. She was found dead in a lodging house. They said it was heart failure. But she'd been different after that night. Her hands never stopped shaking. Pain was not rare here. It was routine. Catherine once showed another girl the scars on her thighs, thin, white, curved like hooks. She laughed when she pointed, laughed too loud, too long. No one joined her. Those who returned with blackened eyes and split lips were the lucky ones. Some didn't return at all. When a girl vanished, they didn't call the police. They searched alleyways, they checked the rivers, they waited to see if her body would wash up near the bridge. If it didn't, they assumed she had moved on, or been moved. Disease bloomed in silence. A cough that wouldn't go away, a rash that spread across the thighs, then ulcerated, gums that bled when touched, eyes that turned yellow, and mouths that reeked of rot. In the corners of cheap brothels, women doubled over with cramps they couldn't name. Some bled for days. Some drank pennyroyal or swallowed mercury remedies whispered from one mouth to another, never written down, remedies that promised no child would grow inside them. They never promised survival. One girl died clutching her stomach, foam pooling at the edge of her lips. Her fingernails dug into the mattress so deep they had to cut the fabric to remove her. No one said her name, no one knew it. Skin masked the pain, for a while. It blurred the vision, warmed the chest, stilled the trembling, but only briefly. Then the shaking returned, the vomiting, the night sweats, the hallucinations. Some swore they saw rats in their blankets. Others spoke to the dead. One woman stood naked in the middle of Dorset Street, screaming at a man no one could see, until the constables dragged her away. She bit one of them, drew blood. They called it madness. They locked her in an asylum. But what else could she become? The body didn't forget. It bent, bruised, bled, but it remembered. The smell of sweat on rough hands, the snap of a belt, the wet breath at the nape of the neck, the sound of coins hitting the floor. Each touch carved a mark. Not just on skin, on spirit. A girl named Clara once whispered, "I go somewhere else, when it happens." When asked where, she said, "A river, cold, quiet. Nothing touches me there." She said it with her eyes open, unblinking. Later that week, she drowned herself in the Thames. The brothels didn't keep records of the sick, or the broken, or the missing. They kept ledgers of earnings. One madam, when asked if she remembered a girl named Ruth, shrugged. She was the one who coughed. She said, couldn't get the sheets clean after her. That was her obituary. Even the city's most brutal killer, Jack, was seen by some as a symptom, not the disease. He cut them, tore them, emptied them of parts no man should know how to remove. But the truth is, their bodies were already half dead when he arrived. And the rest of London barely blinked. By morning, the fog would clear. The streets would be scrubbed, the blood washed down the drains, the cries would fade into whispers, and the girls who survived the night would wake up again. And start over. Until they couldn't. The man at the corner tipped his hat. He wore a fine coat, thick wool, real brass buttons. His boots were polished, the laces new. He smelled faintly of cologne and coal smoke. In his hand, a pocket watch. In his eyes, nothing. He stepped past a girl with torn gloves and a raw cough. He didn't look at her face, just her shoes. When he nodded, she followed. Not far behind him, another man watched, in uniform, a constable. He saw everything and did nothing. At the station house, they laughed. One officer poured himself tea while recounting how he'd relieved the street of filth the night before. Another spoke of how those women never learn his words thick with pride. No one corrected him. No one asked what happened after he dragged her into the alley. In the official log, there was no entry, no name, just routine dispersal. On Whitechapel's streets, the law wore two faces. One that protected, one that punished, but never at the same time. Sarah had once tried to report a client. He had choked her, left bruises, split her lip. She came to the station holding her torn corset in both hands like it was proof of something sacred. She spoke quickly, clearly. She even gave his name. The constable stared at her as if she were made of glass, dirty, useless, already cracked. He asked, "Were you paid?" She hesitated. "Yes, but..." "Then you got what you wanted." He turned away. Her bruises faded, but her voice never returned to what it once was. Inside the churches, they preached purity. Women were warned to guard their virtue, to submit to their husbands, to stay silent. But in the evenings, behind shuttered windows, members of the same congregation knocked on brothel doors. Some brought flowers, some brought knives. They called it a necessary evil. The gentlemen of London doctors, judges, bankers spoke of it as a public service. Better the harlot than the housemaid, one whispered once in a parlor. They spoke of containment, of hygiene, of order. But they never spoke of consent. Newspapers printed headlines drenched in blood and shame. Unfortunate woman found slain, another victim of vice, murder in the abyss. They wrote of Mary Kelly's body, not her mother. They described Catherine's disfigured face, not her laughter when drunk. They quoted police, never neighbors. They sold thousands of copies. A reformer named Mrs. Hall once stood on a street corner and handed out wool blankets and bread. Some girls took them, most didn't. They had learned not to trust anything that came wrapped in kindness. She tried to speak with them, ask their names, their stories, their hopes. One girl, maybe 19, stared at her with eyes so hollow they looked silver in the light. She said, "You're too late." It then turned and vanished into the mist. Parliament held debates on the Contagious Diseases Acts. Men in powdered wigs discussed the merits of forced examinations, of detaining women suspected of immorality. They argued over the definition of a prostitute, never once asking one into the chamber. The women were poked, scraped, spread open, and labeled. If they cried, they were hysterical. If they resisted, they were arrested. The clients always walked free. Underneath all the violence, something deeper churned a hunger to punish women for being seen, for being poor, for being wanted, to make them carry the weight of the world's desire and its disgust. They were blamed for the temptations others could not resist, and when men sinned, it was the women who bore the cost. One night, a man stabbed a girl in Hanbury Street and left her bleeding in the rain. The next morning, the paper described her as a known drunken prostitute. Her name appeared once. The killer's description appeared never. The real horror wasn't in the blood. It was in how quickly it dried, how soon it became routine, how easily a corpse became a column. In the wealthier districts, the lamps burned brighter, the windows glowed with laughter and dinner parties. Men toasted to the Queen and to progress. Their wives wore gloves and pearls. Their daughters recited hymns. But when they slept, the carriages rolled again toward Whitechapel, toward Spitalfields, toward the same rooms where women waited with their backs against walls, praying not for rescue, but for it to be quick. This wasn't just about sex. It was about power, and punishment, and forgetting. Because so long as the women were seen as sinners, no one had to ask what they were surviving. And every night, the city reset. The blood was scrubbed, the skirts restitched, the stories rewritten, and the lie of morality kept marching on. The woman stood at the edge of the alley holding a loaf of bread. It was wrapped in old newspaper, still warm. She wore a coat too fine for this street. Her boots were polished, her gloves clean. Her name was Josephine Butler. The girls didn't speak to her, not at first. They watched from doorways and behind hanging sheets, their eyes shadowed, their arms folded. She was another one of them. They thought, another voice telling them what they already knew, that they were fallen, that they needed to be saved. But Josephine didn't preach. She listened. Inside a shelter near Commercial Street, she lit a lantern and waited, one by one. The girls came, not for prayers, for warmth. She offered them hot soup and clean linen, but more than that, she offered silence, the kind that said, "You can speak. Or not, you're still real." One girl, missing half her teeth, asked, "You think we're worth saving?" Josephine didn't answer right away. "Then you were never the ones who needed saving." Farther down the street, another light burned. William Booth, a man with worn shoes and a voice like thunder and fog, walked from pub to pub offering something strange work. Not handouts, not sermons, work. He handed out matches, boots, fabric, soap. He taught girls to scrub, to bake, to write their names again. His place smelled not of gin, but yeast and coal and hope. Not all of them stayed. Most didn't. But some did. One of them, a girl named Ruth, learned to read. Another, Maggie, sewed herself a blue dress when she wore it. She said she almost believed she was new. Almost, but even the brightest hands cast shadows. In 1885, a man named W.T. Stead published a story. He wrote of a girl sold for £5, of a virgin smuggled through brothel doors with chloroform on her lips. He bought her, took her, described it all. He called it an exposé. He said it was to wake the world. The world did wake briefly. Laws changed, age of consent raised, doors slammed shut. But the girl, she never returned home. Sometimes the helpers became ghosts too. Josephine once visited a house near Lambeth where girls were held under lock. The madam offered her tea, said the girls were free to leave, but the doors said otherwise. One girl slipped Josephine a note, just 5 words. "Tell them I am here." Josephine never saw her again. Some victories came quiet. A girl named Ellen worked in a bakery for 6 months. She stopped jumping when the bell rang. She grew stronger. Her cheeks filled out. She wore gloves, not to hide bruises, but because her hands were cold in the morning. One day, she vanished. Not into an alley. She left a note gone to Leeds. Got a job, don't wait. It smelled faintly of flour. But for every flicker, the fog closed in thicker. A reformer might reach one, 10, even 100 girls. But thousands waited in line, at lodging houses, behind taverns, in the back rooms of churches. Their names never written, their stories never told. They moved through the city like ghosts. Only seen when bleeding. One winter, a constable found a girl on the steps of a church, frozen, knees tucked to chest, her mouth open as if she had just finished a word. She had a scarf around her wrist, red and gold. Inside her coat pocket, a folded scrap of paper, a name. Mary. This wasn't redemption. It was resistance. Not loud, not clean, but breath by breath, step by step. Somewhere, a match is struck. A hand cups it, protects it from the wind. It flickers, then fades, then flickers again. The door was never opened gently. When they finally forced it in boot-cracking wood, hinges screaming, the room was already silent. The fire had burned itself out. Smoke clung to the ceiling, thick as breath. The candle on the mantel had melted to a crooked stalk of wax. The only light came from the window, fractured through dirty glass, pale, cold, unforgiving. She was there, what was left of her, laid back in bed, as if sleeping, as if waiting. But no human hands could have arranged what they found. Her face gone, stripped to muscle, one eye intact, open, staring without shape, her abdomen emptied, her heart missing. The sheet at her feet was soaked through. The floor beneath the bed pooled dark and slick. The wallpaper near her head bore smears where fingers had reached out, blindly, before giving up. On the table, a teacup, half full, lipstick at the rim, the chair beside it still warm. Outside, someone wept. Not for her, but for themselves. They buried her quietly, no procession, no flowers. They called her the last. But even that was a lie. Years passed. The fog lifted. The buildings changed. The brothels became tenements. The tenements became ruins. And the ruins were built over. But the names, the real names, were never spoken again. Not in papers. Not in prayers. Only in the hush between footfalls on old stone. Sometimes, in winter, when the air is still and the streets forget to echo, someone walks past Miller's Court without knowing, and feels it, the cold that isn't weather, the silence that isn't peace, a name that doesn't sound like a name at all, but like breath caught in a throat. Mary,